All right, hey everybody, I'm Dre. Today we have a 2015 Fusion 1.5 EcoBoost. Water pump is making noise and it moves. So what we're gonna do is get the light on. I don't know if you can see that on video, but the pulley moves back and forth. The water pump is grinding and making noise. So on these, you have to pull the timing belt off to do the water pump. So we're going to show you how to do a timing belt, remove the timing belt to do the water pump. All right, first thing you want to do is disconnect the negative on the battery. I know it's easier to get to the positive side on this, but once you go to reconnect it, there is a chance that it shocks the system because of the amperage that it pulls when it wakes back up. All right, if you're gonna do a water pump or a timing belt swap on this engine, you have to have the timing tools. You can get you a kit from your local tool dealer. Amazon sells them, eBay, or anything on the internet will sell it. The reason for that is the crank bolt is not keyed. So it uses torque or friction to hold it in time on top dead center whenever you put the belt in. So you'll need this little pin. And what this does is you put it in the back of the block, the crank will come around and it'll stop on one of the counter or the counterbalances of the crank, and it'll stop it from going any further, and that will put you in top dead center. So what we have to do now to be able to install that tool is we have to pull the bracket for the axle, because the plug, if we can get you in there, there's a 10mm plug that sits behind this bracket that you remove, and that's where you put the pin in. We'll show you a little bit more after we get this bracket out of the way. It's just a nut here, and then there's 3 bolts. You don't have to remove the axle, but you will have to pull the bracket, and the bracket will roll out after you lose. All right, so what you do is take the 2 13mm nuts off the bottom right here, and there's one on top, and you can pull this plate off. You take the lower 13mm bolt here, lower 13 right here, and there's one at the very top right underneath the boost tube. Take that out and you can roll this around and out of your way. Right, go ahead, cut it.
Are you gonna tell them about the bolt?
Or no, well, I can do that too. Look,
there's the bolt that we're gonna pull out right there for the timing pin. Put it in TDC. And when we get to that point, we'll show you.
And if you're doing this in your driveway, or it's one of the bigger jobs that you've ever tried doing as a DIYer, you can take this, lay it back on, and it'll actually hold the nuts, and then you can lay the bolts in it like that. If you're worried about not putting what goes where later on, you just lay it down out of the way, and now you know that that's what bolts go to that part. All right, the reason we leave the degas cap or your coolant jug cap off is because it won't pour out because of the vacuum effect, like a straw. So what we're gonna do now, after it's just dripping, we're gonna pull this off, we're gonna let the car down, then you can open the degas bottle or the radiator cap. Well, it's not a radiator cap because it's on a degas bottle, and the rest of the coolant will flow out of it. So we're just gonna lift this up. Sit down. I'm gonna let the car down, or Chris is gonna let the car down, and we'll drop it. We did leave the 10mm for the crank lock in the block still, because we still have to make it or get it right before top dead center so we can install the plug, and we'll show you that, or it's a dowel, but we'll show you that when we get to that point. But right now, come over here, take the cap off of the degas bottle, and that vacuum effect
in there
will start pouring some. Oh, you should have showed it.
It's dribbling, just so you know.
More comes out because of it. So that way you don't get covered in coolant when you originally open it up.
A lot of people are scared to do these because they don't understand the theory that goes behind.
Well, I think the special tools kind of scare people as well.
Crank.
Pull the.
In my opinion, I think it's a ton easier to time because it doesn't matter where you got the slack in the belt. As soon as you pull that tensioner,
every time,
it'll pull the slack to the tension side, and then you torque down crank bolt with the pulley. So you never have to worry about that on this style. Other styles that are keyed, you have to worry about that.
Yeah, this you can always be one tooth out or two teeth out. With this, the slack is perfect because of the design. You don't have the supercharger whine that you would get from regular timing belts if you tighten the tensioner too much. You don't have to check belt deflection. You don't have to do any of that. It's timed perfectly each time.
If you know how to use the tools correctly.
And we're going to show you how to do that. All right, next thing up is we loosen the clamp for the intake side of the turbo. What we're going to do now, these work really, really good to get these push clips out. You just kind of put it behind it and wiggle on the Christmas tree clips. There's another one back here. You don't have to remove it, but you don't want to be tugging on the harnesses or any harness actually, because you can cause damage. You can break the wire. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the other two bolts that hold the pipe on the top. There's 8mm right here. And then if you come back here next to, let me fix this so you can actually see it. I don't know if you can see my finger down there, but between the charge pipe and the diverter valve, there's another 8mm. Go down there. You don't have to do this with electric ratchets. It just makes it a lot easier. So now you can take the intake tube, just slide it off of the turbo, and you can move it to the back. But see how the removing the harness kind of makes it a little bit better, because now it's loose and you can push that pipe out of the way. All right, now you're going to need a T30. You're going to need a T30. We're going to take the bolts out of, or the bracket off the cover, and we'll move it out of the way. It just slides back. There's a little fitting on there, or a channel that it sits in. Another thing to do is to pull that down and out of the way, and you can unlock. Sometimes they're a little grimy from road, and then use your crowfoot, or not crowfoot, but I call it a tech on a stick because it's pretty much what it is. And you can pop that out. So then we're going to take the,
I hate them things.
Yeah, I know. These suck. There we go. And then you can just swivel it out of the way. They are a little, they're a little weird. You got to push the pins, like push it forward, clamp down on it, and then pull back, and it usually pops off the cover, or the valve cover. All right, now you want to get the harness out of the way. We got the bracket that holds the connector and some other wires. If you look right here on this ear, same Christmas tree style deal. Just pull that off. And what I'm going to do to make it easier and have more room, you take it and you put it on the branch of that harness, and you can take it. You don't have to be tight, just like that. Now, if you look at it, you got the cover completely open. So now I'm going to start taking the bolts from the upper cover. All right, now we're getting ready to remove the engine mount. A good idea is to put a wood block on your jack. That way it doesn't puncture or crush the pan. It gives it a better surface area to hold the weight of the engine up. And you just want to jack it up and to the point of resistance. And now we're going to pull off these 3/18. There's 15 right here, 15 right here. And then underneath the degas bottle, it's a 21. But we're going to have to remove the 10 or 8 millimeter right here just to lift it up a little bit so we can get to that 21. All right, we're going to take the 8 millimeter out on this degas bottle. Put your bolts away. And
drop the light.
Yeah, drop the light. There is a tab right here for the degas. There's not a bolt in there. You just kind of pull it up. And you can actually roll this out of the way. So now we're going to go and take the engine mount out. We said it's a 18, 3/18s, 2/15s, and a 21. So. And don't worry about studs getting pulled out.
It'll be fine.
It happens. But after you loosen that up, just make sure you have enough tension holding the engine up that it's not wedged in there, which is something that does happen. So now I'm going to go to the 21 and then a 15.
That's a wobble.
That'll work.
Okay.
And 15. Oh, fuck this. Oh, shit.
That's a 16.
15.
Sure?
Yep. Pause. And now you can slide the mount out. Like I said, if it's the first time doing anything this big of a repair as a DIYer, you can put those nuts there. And then you take the ones that you took from the mount, come over to your mount while it's set out of the way, and you can lay them in. Just make sure it's not in the way of it getting kicked or pushed, or your wife picking it up because it's laying out in the garage. And now you know exactly where those bolts go.
Now you can see the belt. Well, serpentine belt at least.
Let me get that light out of there, because it kind of helped with the seeing. But
now we can see the best thing to do.
I wonder if you can see.
Oh yeah, it's got some play in it. All right.
There you go. It was a little hard with the mount there, but now y'all can see what it does. What I like to do now is bust the bolts on the water pump pulley before pulling the belt off, because the friction of the belt being on there, it's easier to break it free.
Since we're here, I'll get some light on it. Shed some light. There's a crank sensor down there. I done disconnected it. It's pretty easy. It's just got a little tab on it. And then you will have a couple Christmas tree fasteners in the cover that need to be removed as well. Sometimes they break, sometimes they don't. They are a pain to pull out, but if they do break, it's no big deal. You can add a zip tie to hold it in that general area so it does not rub against anything like the belt or something of that nature and cause an issue.
All right, now what we're gonna do, you can pull upper cover off right now, but what I'm gonna do is, or tell you all the reason that we disconnected the battery is because you have to get the alternator out of it. So if the battery is connected and that wire hits anything grounded, it's gonna spike. So it's a 15, 15, and then there's a 15 right here. This idler pulley stays on the alternator. So you're gonna remove that. Back here, there is a bracket for the cover. There's a stud and a nut, and there's two other bolts that hold that bracket. And it's what holds the turbo inlet pipe that we had pushed to the side. You will have to remove the charge pipe rubber right here just to get it out of the way a little bit to be able to get to those bolts. So we're going to do that now, and then we're going to come back. All right, the charge pipe that I was talking about is right here. All you got to do is take the 7mm off. You can pop it back and kind of curve it or curl it down. This little bracket right here, it's got a 13 that goes through it, and then there is a 8mm stud, and then a 10mm nut that sandwiches it between this ear right here. So you remove that because that goes through the bottom of this cover. So now what we're going to do is pull the 8mm out on the cover all through here, and then you don't have to have the crank pulley off to get the cover off because there is a built-in like bottom half of the cover underneath that. So we can take all these off and pull the whole cover, and we'll come back. What we do now is you pull the wheel off, and you can actually take a couple screws out. They're what, 5.5 or
no, they're
7?
just little twist push tabs.
Oh,
and
push tabs.
Two
Okay.
10mm nuts.
And you can fold it
here and here,
and you can fold this back and get it out of your way. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the crank sensor. All it is an 8mm. You just wiggle it a little bit and it'll roll out. And now we're gonna remove the upper cover and then show you where you need to be at right before you time it. And here's the connector that we were talking about right here underneath the water pump. It's leaking, so it's gonna be a little cruddy and stuck. You can take a pick. Well, that's what I'm gonna have to do is take a pick, unless you can get it, because I'm using my wrong hand.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, it's covered in coolant.
And
That's fine.
Whatever.
We'll get that connector out later. That's on the Cali cars. The cover is loose, so we're gonna go to the top and we're gonna show you where to be at before installing the 10 or the crank pin where that 10mm is that we removed that axle bracket for. So we'll be back. All right, with the crank lock, the dowel that goes back here on the back of the block, you want your timing marks at the 11 o'clock position. You can see that dot right, yeah, you can see the dot right there. And same thing with back here, there's a little notch right there. You want these at 11 o'clock. Then we can go and put the dowel in, and as you rotate the engine clockwise, maybe 10 more degrees, these will be in top dead center or top dead position, and it'll butt up against that crank dowel. If you do it anywhere else, you're going to miss it and it won't be in time, but we'll show you that. But now we're going to pull this bracket off. The whole reason that you had to remove the alternator in the first place, so that we can get the belt that sits underneath. All right, now with that cover gone, or the motor mount, this is the 10mm pin that I was talking, or right here. That's the 10mm bolt that I was talking about, and it sits back here behind where that engine mount is. So what I'm gonna do is you take your tool, your pin lock, make sure that the cam gears are at 11 o'clock position. Hopefully people can read a analog clock, and you just throw it in. You don't need to torque it down, you just bottom it out is all with just your fingers. It's got grip on it. There is a flat tip, like it's a flat tip screw, but you don't need to do that. All you need to do is turn it till you can't turn it anymore. And now we're going to turn the engine over, and I'll show you what happens if you watch the timing mark. Everybody, or most people, know what it feels like when you start getting on like a compression stroke. It's kind of like that. It'll stop, and you won't be able to go anymore. Once you feel it stop, you're done, and there you go. You don't want to go crazy with it, but I mean, if it's wiggling the engine back and forth and the belt's not turning anymore, you're on your stop. So now we're gonna raise it, pull the crank pulley off.
Gotta put the other timing tool in, buddy.
We'll stop there.
It's fine. Grab the timing tool.
I didn't even think about that.
We're gonna take the other timing tool and we're gonna put it in the cam gears. It only goes in one way.
You got an arrow on it.
Points
depending
up.
on what, I'm sure most kits are like that. Arrow up, and what you do,
slides on.
Now that you have the crank pin in, or crank dowel in, and this slides on. I know it's a little tight because we got, belt is a little worn, but if it is at least lined up with your cuts and your phasers, you're in time. You don't have to set it all the way back because the back of the phaser kind of curves up anyways, so you won't set it all the way on. It's actually just for the front. But now we're in time with a crank dowel locked. Cams are in time. We're going to take the crankshaft off, because as soon as you pull this off, the crank does free spin.
I'm going to set the tensioner back into its, I guess you would say, neutral position. I'm going to use a prod bar. I don't care about the timing belt. We're not reusing it anyways. And now the tensioner should be in its position where it can be taken off.
You know, the belt is slacked, tensioner is locked, so we can remove the bolt for that, and we can pull the timing belt off. But this is what we were trying to tell you about the...
Well, you can show them better once you get the belt off it.
Oh yeah, all right. Like I was saying, this is torque fixed. So, see, we have the pin or the dowel in for the crank. We got the cams locked, and this is what happens when that bolt is out. The gear just does whatever it wants to do until it's torqued out. But the reason that you have to pull the belt off for a water pump is the tensioner that we had just compressed is actually bolted to the water pump. So you have to...
Still in good shape, but we ain't got a new one.
Yeah, it's, if you go this deep, it's better just to replace everything, unless it had just been done. But that is the reason, and you can actually hear... That's what it came in for, was the noise, because the water pump. And if you look down here, you can actually see the puddle, possibly, of coolant on the underneath the wheat area. And now we're gonna pull the water pump off, and it's just a bunch of 8mm. Just go all the way around, pull your tensioner off, and we'll be back. All right. Usually, if you're doing new timing belt, you should probably do a new tensioner, but with time restraints today, we could not find one, and as you can see, the water pump was really bad. So you can actually leave the tensioner that bolts right here on there, and you just take your water pump bolts off. And that is the reason that you have to remove the timing belt to be able to do this water pump. So what we're going to do, since we're reusing our tensioner, that's why we pulled ours off and it's separated. We're going to clean the mating surface with like a Scotch-Brite style pad, and we're going to put the gasket on, and we're going to bolt the pump back on in the tensioner, and then we'll show you how to lay the belt on. All right, after getting the new pump on with the new gasket, the bolts that hold the pump on, the first procedure is for 53 inch-pound. After you get all of them at that torque, then you go to 89 inch-pounds all the way around. Now, what we're moving on to is the tensioner. We're reusing the old tensioner because we couldn't find one today, and they needed this done. So if you look right here, the little square is what this ear lays in. Make sure that you have it set in there when you put the tensioner on. Let me just thread it in, and we'll come back when we get the belt on. You want me to pull it in the video?
You can. Now the belt's on. Let's get this out of the way.
All right, go
The
again.
belt's on. Slacks on both sides. That doesn't matter.
Make sure the cogs are.
Make sure there's
the
no
teeth are in the-
significant amount of slack in between the gears. This is about what you want. Just a little.
And if you're worried about the crank maybe backing up a little bit when you pull the crank bolt out, you can, because the balancer kind of sits real tight on it, you can kind of set it on and rotate clockwise with that friction to make sure, because it's not going to go any further than what that pin allows it to. So now that we're here, we can pull the pin, and now we're perfectly tensioned. And timing is set. Now we'll go on to putting the balancer on and then back together. All right, this is the other timing tool that you put in place of the crank sensor. Now if you look at the balancer, you'll see that there's a little rectangle right there in the tone ring or the tone wheel for the crank sensor. So a trick to do is make a paint mark right on the opposite side that you're looking at. And when you go to lay it in, rotate it clockwise, because you don't want to go counterclockwise. You want to go clockwise. Take it till that dot gets to where that tool is, and it should fall right in. And now you know that it's time for the tone ring on the pulley or the balancer. All right, after you get your balancer set where it needs to be at, where it's on, lined up with the timing tool that goes in point of the crank sensor, now we have to torque it. Now the first initial torque is 74 foot-pounds. After the 74 foot-pounds, you're going to do 90 degrees and then wait 2 seconds, and then you do another 15 degrees. Now, most people will remove the starter to put the flywheel lock in, but with the cams locked and tension of the belt, and then also the crank pin, it will hold the torque. And I don't advise it, but I'm just telling you that you can do it like that. That's how a senior master taught me at 4, and I've done it that way ever since. So you're going to do your 74 foot-pounds, and just to show that it will hold it, now we got to reset to do 90 degrees and remove the lock or the tool to align the balancer. We are going to do the 90 degrees. Not sure why you wait 2 seconds, maybe because it's a stretch bolt or torque to yield bolt is why you have to wait to let it rebound, and then you do 15. And now if you are worried about the crank moving or the dowel tool allowing the crank to move, you can use one of these rubber straps to lock it. You're going to need help though, because the 90 degrees gets up to like 150 foot-pounds, and then when you do the next 15, it's close to 200. So we're going to torque this real quick. All right, after it gets torqued, you can remove the crank dowel and then remove the plate that holds the phasers together. You can do it from the bottom of the car. What we're going to do now is rotate it 2 rotations
clockwise. Never,
and then see
ever
if the tools will go back in.
Turn these.
Put the tools back in after 2
counterclockwise.
rotations, because the cam rotates as fast as the crank. If phasers will lock and the crank dowel locks, then you know you're in time still. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to rotate it almost 2 degrees or 2 rotations. And then as those cams come around at the 11 o'clock position, we're going to stop. We're going to install the dowel and then take it the rest of the way and make sure that we're in time. All right, we've done the almost 2 rotations. You can see the yellow mark. We're getting ready to put the dowel back in. He's going to finish rotating it the rest of the way until it stops. You don't have to force it. You'll feel the restriction from it. And then we'll see if the cams will lock. And if they lock, then we know that we're in perfect time. There's the stop.
I wonder if I can get it on there.
I might be able to get it from the bottom. I don't know, with your arm in the way.
It's on.
And now we're locked. And
it's in time.
It's in time. So now we can go back to reversal of removal and install everything back. All right, after you make sure that it's in time after your 2 rotations, make sure that you remove the locking dowel. It will, I've seen it at Ford, people forgetting to do it.
Bad things will happen.
It's not good at all. So make sure you remove that and put the plug in, because if you forget the plug, it will pour oil out like I said.
Well, it'll put a hole in the block potentially.
No, not with the, well, I guess with the plug out, it will put a hole in the block if it starves itself. But you will break a lot of stuff if you leave that pin in there. So now we are going to reinstall everything reversed of how we removed it. And we'll do that. All right, here we are with it back together. I know we didn't show the video of putting it back together, but it's just the reversal of removal. Make sure you get your charge pipes tight. Make sure all your clamps are tight. Whatever bolt you took out should go back where you took it out of. Make sure the plug is in the block and the dowel is removed for the crank. We're gonna fill the system up with coolant right now. Make sure your harness is routed like it's supposed to, and then we will start it. And then also don't forget to tighten the nuts or the bolts for the water pump pulley, because we had to remove that. It's a little bit easier to do with the belt on because you have some type of resistance, but sometimes people forget. We just want to make sure you don't. We're using a vacuum fill because it'll suck down the whole system. We can actually watch coolant hoses collapse because it's pulling all the vacuum, or it's putting a vacuum on the cooling system. So when you do that, if your gauge doesn't hold vacuum, then you know you have an instant leak before putting anything into the cooling system. So you usually set that or let it sit for about 5 minutes just to make sure you don't have any leaks, because you don't want to do a water pump and say there's a nick on the gasket or something, and then instantly you pour in coolant and all of it pours out on the ground and you have to do it over again. So this is a simple way of testing the system without actually having coolant in it. After topping off the coolant and you have everything else connected, make sure your alternator wire is connected and everything else. We're going to connect the negative terminal again. Now, remember I told you that you do the negative only unless you're removing the battery, and you always do it first. And if you watch how the lights came on, that's the reason for that. This pulls a lot of amperage when all the modules wake back up after battery's been disconnected. You do it on the positive side, there's a good chance that you can spike a module and then you have a brick because you're not going to be able to use it anymore and you will have to replace it. You might get away with it every once in a while, and I'm sure some people have, but I've had to replace a bunch of them because of AutoZone and other places replacing batteries and doing that. All right, now we're going to start it up. I'll put the cover on, and as long as you follow the procedure, it should be okay. And I know y'all didn't get to hear the water pump before or see it, but this is a lot quieter than it was before. It is a little noisy because it's a DI engine, but direct injected engine. But it's not screeching or screaming anymore. So what we'll do is we did the vacuum fill. We'll make sure we don't have any air pockets. We'll turn the heat on, make sure we have coolant flow, and test it after that.